By late 1968, the air war over Indochina had entered a strange phase. The United States still dominated the skies, yet every mission carried a growing sense of inevitability. Losses were mounting, defenses improving, and confidence quietly eroding. American aircraft flew higher, faster, and farther than anything North Vietnam could produce, but the margin was narrowing. At the center of this aerial contest was a machine few outside naval aviation truly understood, the Grumman A6 Intruder. Unlike the sleek fighters that dominated headlines, the A6 was ugly, squat, almost agricultural in appearance. It was built not to dogfight, but to penetrate. All weather, day or night, low altitude, heavy payload. It flew where radar was blind and missiles struggled to track. It carried American power directly into defended airspace and survived. Until one did not. On the night of 3 October 1968, a U.S. Navy A-6A Intruder launched from the deck of an aircraft carrier in the Gulf of Tonkin as part of a routine strike package targeting logistics hubs west of Hanoi. The crew consisted of two men, Lieutenant Commander James H. Carter, pilot, and Lieutenant Robert Bobby Keene, bombardier navigator. They had flown together for nearly a year. The mission profile was standard: low-level ingress, terrain masking, radar-guided bombing, then immediate egress toward the coast. Weather was poor: thick cloud layers, intermittent rain, and heavy humidity. Perfect conditions for an intruder, dangerous for everything else. At 02:17 local time, Carter pushed the aircraft down to just under 500 feet. The terrain following radar painted a ghostly outline of hills and river valleys ahead. Anti-aircraft fire flared sporadically in the distance, inaccurate and blind. Then, without warning, the cockpit lit up. A sharp bang reverberated through the fuselage, not an explosion, but a violent mechanical shock. The left engine surged, then dropped power. Warning lights cascaded across the instrument panel. Fuel pressure fluctuated wildly. Left engine fire. No, wait, false indication, Keene said, his voice tight. Carter pulled back on the throttle, instinctively compensating. The intruder shuddered, then stabilized. They were still flying, but something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Moments later, the navigation system failed. The radar display smeared into static. Terrain contours vanished. The inertial system began to drift, its reference corrupted. They were suddenly blind, flying low, fast, and deep inside enemy territory with no reliable navigation. Abort the mission. That was the procedure. Turn east, climb, and run. Carter tried. The controls responded sluggishly. The aircraft resisted climb. The right engine began to fluctuate as well, not failing, but uneven. Fuel imbalance warnings screamed. Hydraulics? Keene asked. Pressure's dropping, not gone, just bleeding. The intruder could fly on one engine. It could even limp home with damaged systems, but only if the pilot knew exactly where he was. They did not. For nearly 15 minutes, Carter flew by instinct and partial instruments, trying to regain bearings. The weather closed in. The cloud deck thickened. Rain hammered the canopy. Every second increased the chance of flying into terrain, or worse, being detected at a moment of vulnerability. Then Keene saw it on the degraded radar return. A straight line. Too straight to be natural. Jim, I think that's concrete. Carter stared at the screen, a narrow strip barely distinguishable from noise. Intelligence briefings flashed through his mind, emergency dispersal strips, hastily constructed, used by North Vietnamese fighters in emergencies. Short, crude, barely adequate. For a MiG. Absolutely impossible for an A6. But the alternatives were worse. Ejection at low altitude meant capture or death. Flying blind meant eventually crashing. The intruder was losing systems incrementally, like a patient bleeding internally. Carter made a decision that violated doctrine, logic, and every instinct drilled into him. "We're landing," he said. Keene did not argue. The descent was brutal. Carter dropped below the cloud layer at less than 300 feet, fighting asymmetric thrust. Trees flashed past beneath them. Tracer fire rose sporadically, unfocused and late. Then the strip appeared, sudden, stark, and terrifyingly short. Concrete slabs laid directly into jungle soil. No lights, no markings. Carter lined up manually, ignoring warning alarms. Airspeed high, sink rate unstable. "Hold on," he said. The A6 slammed onto the runway harder than any carrier landing Carter had ever flown. The left landing gear groaned but held. The aircraft bounced once, veered slightly, then settled, skidding to a halt in a storm of dust, sparks, and shredded rubber. Silence followed. For 3 seconds, neither man moved. Then voices, shouting in Vietnamese, flashlights, rifles, figures emerging from the darkness like ghosts. Carter shut down the remaining engine. "We're done," Keane said. They were pulled from the cockpit at gunpoint, disoriented but alive. The intruder sat behind them, intact, steaming gently in the humid night. Within an hour, camouflage netting was thrown over the aircraft. By dawn, it no longer existed, at least officially. And within days, messages were quietly transmitted northward and westward. An American attack aircraft had landed intact, not destroyed, not burned, not stripped, captured. And for the first time in the war, North Vietnam possessed something it never expected to hold in its hands, a working example of the aircraft that had been terrorizing its defenses, one designed to fly low, see through darkness, and strike without warning. The question was no longer how to destroy it. The question was, what could be learned from it before the world found out?
The airstrip was never meant to host anything larger than a MiG-17. Its concrete surface cracked under the weight of the intruder, hairline fractures spreading outward like veins beneath the fuselage. For the first 24 hours, no one touched the aircraft. Orders had been clear: do nothing until Hanoi decides who is allowed to see it. The crew was transferred within hours, blindfolded, separated, and driven north. The aircraft remained where it had stopped, its wings folded slightly inward by design, making it appear almost compact, deceptively harmless. To the untrained eye, it looked like a damaged American plane that had simply failed. To the men who understood aviation, it looked like a miracle. By the third day, a small convoy arrived at the airfield under heavy cover. No insignia, no rank markings, just quiet men in plain uniforms, some Vietnamese, some unmistakably foreign. Russian was spoken softly, never loudly, never in the open. Colonel Alexei M. Sidorov stepped out last. He had flown nearly everything the Soviet Union considered operationally relevant: fighters, bombers, experimental platforms never acknowledged in public. He was not impressed easily, but when the camouflage netting was pulled back, he stopped walking. The A6 Intruder was smaller than he had imagined, yet denser, purposeful. Its lines were blunt, utilitarian, almost crude. There was no elegance, no attempt at intimidation. It was a machine designed to do a job and disappear. "This is not an American fighter," Sidorov said quietly. "This is an American tool." The initial inspection began immediately. What struck the engineers first was not the avionics, nor the engines, nor even the weapons pylons. It was the structure. The aircraft was built to endure low-level punishment: reinforced wing roots, heavy landing gear, a fuselage clearly designed to absorb stress rather than avoid it. "This aircraft expects to be hit," one engineer muttered. Inside the cockpit, the philosophy became clearer. The pilot and bombardier navigator sat side by side, not in tandem. The arrangement encouraged constant communication. Systems were split logically, not redundantly. The pilot flew, the navigator thought. Radar displays dominated the right side, glowing faintly even in standby mode. terrain-following systems, bombing computers, navigation aids, everything pointed towards one doctrine: penetration over altitude. Soviet bombers avoided defenses by flying high. Fighters relied on speed and maneuver. The A-6 did neither. It slipped under radar, through weather, into places where interceptors struggled and missiles reacted too late. The radar alone astonished the observers. It could map terrain in real time at low altitude, not a vague outline, but contours, ridges, valleys, man-made structures. The system was complex, delicate, and terrifyingly effective. "This is how they come at night," a Vietnamese officer said. "This is how they never miss." The engines told a different story. The twin turbojets were powerful but temperamental. Designed for carrier operations, they demanded pristine maintenance. Fuel quality mattered, environmental conditions mattered, tolerances were tight. "This aircraft assumes an empire behind it, supply chains, spare parts, specialists," Sidorov said. He paused. "It would not survive long in our system." And yet it had survived here, damaged, bleeding systems, flown by instinct and desperation, and landed intact. That contradiction unsettled him. Over the next week, the aircraft was partially disassembled under makeshift shelters. Components were photographed, sketched, labeled. Nothing was removed permanently. Hanoi's instructions were explicit. The aircraft must be flyable. That raised a question no one voiced openly. Who would fly it? The answer arrived in the form of a coded message from Moscow. "Test flights authorized, limited envelope, no markings, no record." Sidorov was named lead pilot. When he was told that an American prisoner would be brought to advise,
he laughed once, sharply. "They trust us more than they trust themselves," he said. The American, Lieutenant Commander Carter, was brought to the airfield at dawn, guarded, silent, visibly thinner than before. When he saw the intruder uncovered, his expression changed. Not fear, not anger, but something closer to grief. "You kept it whole," he said. "We prefer intact puzzles," Sidorov replied. Carter was not threatened. He did not need to be. Sidorov simply explained the situation. "If we misunderstand this aircraft," he said, "it will kill us. You can help prevent that." Carter looked at the jungle, the cracked runway, the foreign uniforms. "You'll never operate it properly," he said finally. "You don't have the ecosystem." Sidorov nodded. "That may be true, but we only need to understand it once." Preparation took nearly 2 weeks. Manuals were translated line by line. Systems were tested on the ground cautiously. Fuel contamination was filtered as best as possible. Damaged hydraulics were stabilized, not repaired. Temporary solutions meant to survive 1 flight, maybe 2. Carter watched everything. Sometimes he corrected them. Sometimes he refused. More often than not, he stayed silent, letting them learn the hard way, but not the fatal way. On the morning of the test flight, the airfield was sealed completely. No radio traffic, no radar emissions beyond what was necessary. Even friendly units were unaware of what was about to happen. The intruder was rolled onto the runway at first light. Sidorov climbed into the left seat. The cockpit felt cramped compared to Soviet aircraft, but intimate. Everything within reach, everything purposeful. When the engines spooled up, the vibration was immediate, raw, physical, alive. "This aircraft does not want to be admired, it wants to work," Sidorov thought. The takeoff was aggressive, short, violent, and then the A6 lifted into the humid Vietnamese sky, flying once more, not as an American weapon, not yet as a Soviet experiment, but as something far more dangerous, a secret.
The A6 Intruder climbed reluctantly, as if offended by the idea of altitude. Its natural habitat was lower, close to the earth, close to danger. Colonel Alexei Sidorov felt it immediately. This was not a machine that rewarded elegance, it demanded discipline. At 3,000 feet, he leveled off and reduced power. The aircraft steadied, its vibrations settling into a constant mechanical growl. To his right, the radar screen bloomed to life, painting the jungle below in ghostly monochrome. Rivers appeared first, silver scars cutting through darkness, then roads, villages, tree lines. "You see everything," Sidorov muttered. Lieutenant Commander Carter sat behind them on a jump seat, harnessed in, guarded but alert. He had not spoken since engine start. When Sidorov adjusted the terrain following radar sensitivity, Carter leaned forward instinctively. "Don't chase the returns," Carter said. "Let the system work." Sidorov did, and felt the aircraft subtly adjust pitch and power on its own. The realization was unsettling. This was not simply radar, it was automation. The aircraft was interpreting the world faster than the pilot could. Soviet aircraft demanded constant input, constant correction. The A6 assumed information dominance. Its complexity was its shield, until it wasn't. At 40 minutes into the flight, Sidorov deliberately degraded the system. He pulled circuit breakers, one at a time. The effects were immediate and cascading. The radar lost resolution, navigation drifted, the bombing computer threw errors. Each failure demanded another system to compensate. The workload increased exponentially. "This is the price," Sidorov said quietly. "When one thing fails, everything argues." Carter's expression darkened. "That's why we train crews, not pilots." Sidorov glanced back at him. "And when the crew is tired?" Carter did not answer. The near disaster came without drama. A hydraulic fluctuation, minor, barely noticeable, triggered a delayed response in the control surfaces. The aircraft dipped unexpectedly during a low-level turn. Trees filled the canopy. For a fraction of a second, impact felt inevitable. Sidorov reacted instantly, killing the automation and flying manually, muscle memory overriding unfamiliar systems. The intruder clawed upward, missing the treetops by meters. Silence followed. Carter exhaled slowly. "That system doesn't like being surprised." Sidorov nodded. "Neither do pilots." They flew deeper inland, well away from known radar sites. No weapons were loaded, but the bombing computer remained active. Carter explained the system reluctantly at first, then with growing professionalism, perhaps even pride. "You designate," Carter said, pointing. "The computer solves everything else. Wind, speed, release point. You could drop blind." Sidorov nodded slowly. "In our aircraft," he replied, "the pilot decides when to die." The contrast became sharper with every minute. Soviet doctrine assumed interference, jamming, damage. Controls were heavy, mechanical. Systems were crude but survivable. The A6 assumed information dominance. Its complexity was its shield, until it wasn't. At 40 minutes into the flight, Sidorov deliberately degraded the system. He pulled circuit breakers, one at a time. The effects were immediate and cascading. The radar lost resolution, navigation drifted, the bombing computer threw errors. Each failure demanded another system to compensate. The workload increased exponentially. "This is the price," Sidorov said quietly. "When one thing fails, everything argues." Carter's expression darkened. "That's why we train crews, not pilots." Sidorov glanced back at him. "And when the crew is tired?" Carter did not answer. The near disaster came without drama. A hydraulic fluctuation, minor, barely noticeable, triggered a delayed response in the control surfaces. The aircraft dipped unexpectedly during a low-level turn. Trees filled the canopy. For a fraction of a second, impact felt inevitable. Sidorov reacted instantly, killing the automation and flying manually, muscle memory overriding unfamiliar systems. The intruder clawed upward, missing the treetops by meters. Silence followed. Carter exhaled slowly. That system doesn't like being surprised. Sidorov nodded. Neither do pilots. They returned to the airfield 90 minutes after takeoff. The landing was harder than planned, but controlled. When the engines shut down, no one spoke for nearly a full minute. The engineers swarmed the aircraft immediately, hungry for data. Sidorov walked away from the intruder and sat on an ammunition crate, lighting a cigarette with trembling fingers. He had flown MiGs at the edge of the envelope. He had tested prototypes that barely wanted to stay in the air. None of that frightened him like this aircraft had. Not because it was weak, because it was confident. In his preliminary report, Sidorov wrote, "The A6 Intruder is not designed to fight the aircraft opposing it. It is designed to fight the environment, weather, darkness, terrain, human limitation. Against an unprepared enemy, it is devastating. Against a patient enemy, it becomes dependent." Moscow would read that line carefully, and then ask the next question. What happens if such an aircraft falls into the hands of those willing to change it?
The second and third flights were not about flying at all. They were about breaking assumptions. By late October 1968, the captured A6 Intruder had become less an aircraft and more a laboratory. It remained hidden beneath layered camouflage, guarded by units that did not officially exist. Its presence was omitted from logs, maps, even memory. Pilots rotated in under false names. Engineers worked at night. Every flight followed a pattern. Takeoff at dawn, low-level ingress over unpopulated terrain, systems stress testing, return before noon. Colonel Sidorov flew only twice more. After that, Hanoi insisted on joint crews, Vietnamese pilots paired with Soviet advisors, not to master the aircraft, but to interrogate it. They altered nothing permanently. Instead, they simulated damage. Radar attenuation, partial sensor blindness, fuel imbalance, hydraulic lag, communication dropouts. The goal was not to improve the A6, but to understand how it failed. And it failed predictably. When its world remained coherent, radar clean, data flowing, crew synchronized, the intruder was terrifying. It flew through rain that blinded MiGs. It hugged terrain so closely that radar operators swore it was a ghost. It struck coordinates with mathematical cruelty. But when the world fractured, even slightly, the aircraft demanded more than it could give. Crew workloads spiked. Automation argued with human instinct. Recovery windows narrowed brutally. A Vietnamese test pilot, Captain Nguyen Van Thuan, described it best after his first flight. "This aircraft does not forgive confusion. It assumes the pilot lives in a perfect universe." That insight became the foundation of the final report. The Soviets compared the A6 not to fighters, but to philosophy. It represented a belief that technology could smooth chaos, that war could be reduced to data, algorithms, procedures. North Vietnam had survived precisely because war was none of those things. By November, the decision was made. The aircraft would not fly again. The risk of discovery was growing. American reconnaissance patterns were shifting. Something had been noticed, an absence perhaps. The intruder was quietly disassembled, not for trophies, but for silence. Key components were removed and sent north. The airframe itself was rendered unrecognizable, broken down and buried under layers of jungle soil and concrete. Officially, the aircraft had crashed during a failed landing attempt. No wreckage recovered. Unofficially, its lessons traveled far. Radar concepts influenced future low-level penetration doctrine. Crew coordination models were studied. Automation limits were noted, sometimes rejected outright. The Americans never learned the full truth. Lieutenant Commander Carter was released months later during a prisoner exchange. He returned thinner, quieter, and unwilling to speak about the intruder. When pressed years later by a historian, he said only this: "They didn't steal it, they understood it."
Colonel Sidorov retired without ceremony. In a private lecture at an aviation institute in the late 1970s, he summarized the experience in a single sentence. "The Americans built a machine to defeat nature. We build machines to survive it." The A6 Intruder continued to fly in American service for decades, praised for its reliability, its lethality, its precision. No one mentioned the one that landed in the jungle and never came home, and no one filed the report that concluded, "Technology can dominate a battlefield, but only humility survives a war."